A 13-year-old black boy walks into a bank to deposit $80, and minutes later, police are called. Why? Because the manager didn't believe a kid like him could belong to someone like her. What she didn't know. His mom wasn't just any woman, she was one of the bank's biggest clients, and she was on her way. What are you doing here? You don't belong in this bank. Those were the first words 13-year-old Malik heard from the white bank manager the moment he stepped inside. No greeting. No smile. No offer of help. Just suspicion. Malik stood there for a second, caught off guard. He wasn't sure she was even talking to him. His eyes shifted around the grand lobby, polished marble floors, glass walls, people in suits tapping on iPads. It was quiet. Too quiet. And now, it felt like every eye in the room was on him. He clutched his school folder tighter and held up the bank card. I'm here to make a deposit, he said, his voice soft but steady. It was a simple task. Something his mom had taught him to do every month. She wanted him to learn about saving money early. About being independent. About building habits she never had the chance to at his age. Today, he had $80 in birthday cash and allowance. He'd even written a sticky note that said, "Deposit to savings." He was proud. But pride was the last thing he felt standing in that lobby. The bank manager didn't even glance at the card he was holding. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe. His hoodie, his backpack, his skin. "Where are your parents?" she asked sharply. "My mom's at work," he answered. "She said I could do this on my own." He thought that would be enough. He thought she'd realize he wasn't doing anything wrong. But her stare only hardened. She leaned over the front desk and whispered something to a nearby employee. Then picked up the phone. At first, Malik thought maybe she was calling someone from customer service. But her words stopped him cold. Yes. He's here alone. Acting suspicious. African American. No ID. Might be using a stolen card. His throat tightened. His hands began to tremble. He wanted to speak, to defend himself, but the room suddenly felt colder. Bigger. And he felt smaller. He looked down at the card again. His mom's name was on it, Dr. Nadine Carter. She always said he should be proud of that name. That one day, it would open doors. But here, in this bank, it was only closing them. Within minutes, 2 police officers walked through the door. Tall, stern, and serious. They walked straight to Malik. "Do you have identification?" one asked. "What's your purpose here?" the other followed, firm. Malik tried to explain. I have a savings account here. My mom asked me to deposit this. That's her card. I'm her son." But as he spoke, the manager stepped forward again. "He's lying," she said confidently. "There's no way a 13-year-old kid like that is connected to someone named Dr. Carter. I've never seen him before." The officers looked down at Malik. One gently placed a hand on his shoulder and began to guide him toward the door. That's when panic set in. "Please, can you just call my mom?" he said, louder now. He didn't care about the stares anymore. He didn't care about the embarrassment. He just wanted his mom. As he reached for his phone to text her, one officer paused, hesitant. Something didn't feel right. But the bank manager continued pressing. He could be dangerous. You can't just trust what he's saying. Outside, Malik sat on the bank's front steps, holding back tears. People walked past, pretending not to see. The officers waited beside him, watching. And then, a black SUV pulled up. The door flew open, and a woman in a sharp navy blue suit and heels stepped out with authority. Dr. Nadine Carter had arrived. She didn't storm over. She walked with intention, calm and poised. Her eyes met Malik's first. She knelt, took his face in her hands, and asked softly, "Are you okay, baby?" Then she turned to the officers. "This is my son. What's going on here?" The officers explained they were responding to a suspicious activity report from the bank manager. That's when Nadine's face changed. She stood up and marched straight back into the bank. The manager, who had been standing smug behind the counter, suddenly looked like she'd seen a ghost. "I'm Dr. Nadine Carter," Nadine said firmly, flashing her ID. That card you accused my son of stealing? It's mine. He's on the account. He's done this before. You never had a problem then. The manager stuttered, trying to explain. I didn't recognize him. I didn't know. You didn't ask, Nadine interrupted. You judged. You profiled. You embarrassed a child because of how he looked. Because he didn't fit your idea of who should be in this space. The silence in the bank was deafening. Nadine continued, you called the police on a 13-year-old boy for trying to deposit money. He came here to grow, to learn. And you turned it into trauma. The bank manager had no words. The officers, still standing by, shifted uncomfortably. Some customers clapped quietly. Others lowered their eyes. Nadine turned to her son. Come on, Malik. We're switching banks. And just before leaving, she looked back and said loud enough for everyone to hear, teach your employees that financial institutions don't belong to one race, one class, or one kind of customer. They belong to everyone. As the doors closed behind them, Malik smiled through his tears. His mom hadn't just saved the day. She'd delivered a lesson that bank and the world desperately needed to hear. Malik stood at the counter, his fingers gripping the edge of the desk. He looked up at the white bank manager with a nervous smile and said politely, my mom asked me to deposit this. In his hand was a plain blue debit card, slightly worn on the edges from years of use. A yellow sticky note was stuck to the front, written in his mom's cursive handwriting, savings deposit, $80. Mom! He held it out for her to see, thinking she'd take it and start typing on the keyboard like the other tellers he'd seen before. But she didn't even glance at it. Instead, the manager's eyes lingered on Malik's face. Then down to his hoodie, his backpack, and finally the hand that held the card. Her lips tightened. She didn't ask any questions. She didn't greet him. She didn't smile. She simply narrowed her eyes and whispered something to the woman next to her. Malik noticed it. The whisper. The shift in the room. The sudden change in energy. The woman she spoke to gave him a quick glance and walked away. The manager picked up the phone. For a moment, Malik assumed she was calling another teller. Maybe she needed help with his account. Maybe she had to check something in the system. He stood still, quiet and respectful like his mom had taught him. Don't speak unless you're asked. Don't make sudden moves. Be polite, and they'll respect you. But then he heard her say the words. Clear as day. Yes, he's alone. He's acting suspicious, yes, he's black. Malik's heart dropped. The words hit him like ice water. He blinked, stunned, unsure if he'd heard right. But she wasn't even trying to whisper anymore. She said it as if it were protocol. He looked around. Suddenly, people were watching him. A man in a gray suit near the entrance pretended to scroll on his phone, but his eyes kept flicking up. A woman with 2 toddlers clutched her purse a little tighter and subtly nudged her kids behind her. The security guard, who had been standing casually near the wall, straightened up and took a step forward. And Malik? He froze. His fingers felt cold. His mouth went dry. That card, his mom's card, now felt like contraband in his hand. All he wanted to do was save money. That's it. $80. He'd spent weeks collecting birthday cash from relatives. He saved his weekly allowance instead of spending it on snacks after school. He even helped his uncle clean the garage last weekend for an extra $10. He was saving for a new bicycle. A red one, with gears and shocks. Something his friends at school would admire. And now, this? He wasn't a criminal. He wasn't causing a scene. He had followed every rule. He waited in line. He was polite. But none of that seemed to matter. Because in that moment, he wasn't seen as a responsible kid learning how to handle money. He was seen as a threat. A problem. A risk. A young black boy, alone in a white space. The bank felt like it was closing in on him. The hum of quiet conversation had shifted. Whispers. Quick glances. A sense of tension filled the air that hadn't been there a moment ago. Malik looked back at the bank manager. She wasn't looking at him anymore. She was still on the phone, voice lowered, but the damage had been done. A few feet away, the front door opened. Two uniformed police officers walked in. Malik's stomach twisted. His hands began to tremble. Were they here for him? What had he even done? The officers scanned the room. The manager raised a hand and pointed subtly in his direction. One officer gave a small nod and began walking toward him. Malik stepped back instinctively. "Hey there, son," the officer said, voice even but firm. "We got a call. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Malik swallowed hard and tried to steady his voice. I came to deposit money. My mom asked me to. This is her card. I've done it before. I'm not doing anything wrong." He held out the card again, hoping anyone would believe him. The second officer glanced at the card but didn't take it. "Do you have ID?" he asked. "I'm 13, Malik replied quietly. "I don't have one yet." Before the officers could speak again, the bank manager stepped forward. "He's lying," she said firmly. "That's not his card. That name, Dr. Nadine Carter, doesn't belong to a kid like him." Malik's head snapped up. A kid like him. He knew what that meant. She didn't believe his mom could be a doctor. She didn't believe someone who looked like him could have any connection to someone with that kind of title. That kind of power. That kind of success. The officers hesitated. One of them motioned gently for Malik to step outside. He felt everything inside him begin to crack, shame, fear, and confusion all swelling at once. He was 13. He had done everything right. And yet, here he was escorted out of a bank for simply existing. Within minutes, the double doors of the bank opened with a quiet whoosh, and in walked two uniformed officers, one male, one female. Their presence was immediate and commanding, drawing the attention of everyone in the lobby. The marble floor echoed faintly beneath their boots as they approached the boy standing silently near the counter. Malik tried to stand taller, tried not to look scared. But inside, his heart was pounding so hard he could barely breathe. The taller officer stepped forward. "Hey, buddy. We got a call. Can you tell us what you're doing here?" The other officer stood slightly behind, her hand resting near her radio. Malik cleared his throat, his voice barely a whisper at first. I came to deposit money. My mom gave me her card. She told me I could do it by myself." The officers glanced at each other. One of them nodded, then asked, "Do you have any ID on you?" Malik hesitated. "I'm 13. I don't have a license or anything. But I've been here before. My mom even wrote a note." He fumbled through his folder, pulling out the sticky note his mother had written in blue ink. It read, "Deposit $80 into Malik's savings, Dr. Nadine Carter." He held it up alongside the debit card, hoping and praying that someone would just believe him. But before either officer could respond, the manager, who had been watching from behind the counter, suddenly stepped forward, her voice sharp and decisive. "He's lying." The words cut through the room like a blade. "That's not his card. He doesn't look like he belongs to a doctor." Time stopped for Malik. "He doesn't look like he belongs to a doctor." That sentence echoed inside him like thunder. Not because of what it said, but because of what it meant. She didn't just accuse him of lying. She accused him of being impossible. A black boy. In a hoodie. In a bank. Alone. Talking about deposits and savings and doctors. To her, that just didn't add up. She wasn't looking at the evidence. She was looking at his skin. The female officer looked down at the card again, then at the trembling boy in front of her. There was hesitation in her eyes. Doubt. But the manager doubled down. "He's wasting your time. He probably stole that card. I've seen this before." The male officer gently reached out, his tone neutral but firm. "We're going to step outside for a moment, son. Just to talk, all right?" Malik didn't move. He stared at the card in his hand like it had betrayed him. The one thing that was supposed to prove he belonged here now meant nothing. "Can I just call my mom?" he asked quietly. "You can call her outside," the officer replied. The bank lobby fell into a heavy silence. Customers looked away. Some watched with pity. Others with judgment. Malik's legs moved, but his heart stayed behind. Every step toward the door felt like walking through quicksand. The cold air outside hit his face, but the heat of humiliation burned deeper. He had done everything right. Dressed neatly. Spoke respectfully. Followed all the rules. And still, it wasn't enough. The officers stood nearby, one of them quietly talking into his radio. Malik sat on the concrete planter just outside the entrance, clutching the card with both hands, trying not to cry. He pulled out his phone and shakily typed a text, "Mom. They called the police. Please come. I'm outside." He pressed send. He didn't even know if she'd be able to answer right away. She was in back-to-back meetings all day. She always told him to be independent, but right now, all he wanted was for her to show up. 10 minutes passed like an hour. And then, everything changed. A sleek black SUV pulled up to the curb. The engine barely had time to shut off before the driver's door opened. Dr. Nadine Carter stepped out. She was wearing a fitted blazer, sharp black heels, and the kind of presence that turned heads before she even spoke. Her hair was tied back, her bag slung over one shoulder, and her eyes locked directly on her son. "Malik," she said, her voice tight with concern. He stood up fast and ran to her. "They said I don't belong, Mom," he whispered, eyes watery. "She said I was lying. That you couldn't be my mom." Dr. Carter didn't hug him just yet. She turned, scanned the bank entrance, then calmly walked toward the officers standing by the door. "Which one of you detained my son?" she asked, voice controlled, but deadly serious. The male officer cleared his throat. "Ma'am, we received a call from the bank manager." "Let me stop you right there," she said, holding up her ID. "I am Dr. Nadine Carter." That card he was holding? "It's mine. He is my son. And I am authorized to have him handle basic transactions on my behalf. This is not the first time he's been here." The officers looked stunned. One of them muttered, "We didn't know exactly," Nadine snapped. "You didn't know. Because you didn't ask. You assumed. Just like the manager inside." She turned toward the glass doors of the bank, her jaw clenched. "And I promise you, this won't end here." A loud screech cut through the quiet tension outside the bank. Heads turned. A sleek black SUV had come to a sudden stop in the fire lane, tires squealing slightly as the vehicle halted with purpose. The driver's side door flung open, and a woman stepped out, not in panic, but with precision. She didn't slam the door. She didn't shout. But every step she took toward the bank entrance screamed urgency and authority. Dr. Nadine Carter had arrived. Her heels clicked sharply against the sidewalk as she approached each step fast, deliberate, and unshakably confident. She wore a deep navy suit, tailored to perfection, her silk blouse immaculate despite the chaos she'd just been thrown into. Her hair was pulled back into a sleek bun. Her lips, painted with subtle precision, were pressed into a line of pure focus. On her wrist was a Cartier watch. In her eyes? Fire. Less than 10 minutes earlier, she had been wrapping up a video call with 3 venture capitalists. The conversation had been intense, millions were at stake in her company's upcoming product launch. But then, a simple vibration interrupted everything. She glanced down at her phone. A text from her son, Malik. "Mom, they're calling the cops on me. Please come." She read it twice. Her breath caught. She didn't ask questions. She didn't finish the call. She didn't even explain to her assistant why she was rushing out the door. She just grabbed her keys and ran. Now she stood on the sidewalk in front of the bank, her eyes locked on the officers surrounding her son. 13-year-old Malik sat on the concrete ledge outside, looking down, holding his backpack and his mother's debit card like it was a weapon. The look on his face, half shame, half fear, hit Nadine like a punch to the chest. She walked faster. 2 police officers turned as she approached. She didn't yell. She didn't scream. But her voice carried the weight of someone who never got ignored. "That's my son," she said, calm but razor-sharp. "Is there a problem?" The male officer blinked. He looked back at Malik, then at Nadine. Something about her presence, the power in her voice, the fire in her eyes, threw him off. The female officer stepped slightly forward. "Ma'am, we were responding to a call from inside. The manager reported possible fraud." "Fraud?" Nadine repeated, her voice rising just a note. "You think a 13-year-old committing fraud came to the bank to deposit money?" Neither officer answered immediately. The air between them tensed. Just then, the bank manager emerged from the doors. Her face, once smug and self-assured, had drained of color. She paused mid-step, as if suddenly recognizing the storm she'd summoned. Nadine turned slowly. Their eyes met. And the manager's spine visibly straightened. She tried to muster the same commanding tone she'd used with Malik, but it faltered. "I didn't know he was your son," she said quickly. "He didn't have ID. He was alone. I was just following protocol." Nadine took one slow step toward her. "Protocol?" she asked, voice controlled but ice-cold. "Is it protocol to accuse children of theft without evidence? Is it protocol to assume that a black child couldn't possibly be associated with a doctor, let alone a CEO?" The manager tried to interrupt. "I didn't say that." But Malik's voice cut through, soft but clear. "You did. You said I didn't look like I belonged to a doctor." The words hung in the air. A few people had gathered on the sidewalk. Some passers-by had stopped, watching. A man across the street was holding up his phone. Recording. Nadine took a deep breath, eyes never leaving the manager. "Let me introduce myself." She reached into her bag and pulled out her ID badge, holding it up. Dr. Nadine Carter. Harvard Business School graduate. Former managing director at Wall Street's largest firm. And current CEO of Carter Tech, the same fintech company that helped digitize your bank's customer payment system last year. The manager blinked. Nadine continued. "Your bank holds $8 million of our corporate capital. Or rather, it held it." She pulled out her phone. "I'm calling our investment team right now. We'll be transferring every cent elsewhere. Today." Silence. Total silence. The officers stepped back slightly. The female officer nodded respectfully. "Understood, Dr. Carter," she said quietly. The bank manager opened her mouth, perhaps to apologize, but no words came. Nadine turned to her son, placing a hand gently on his shoulder. "Are you okay?" Malik nodded, trying to hide the tears still burning in his eyes. "You didn't do anything wrong," she said softly. "You hear me?" "Nothing." Then she turned back toward the bank one last time. "This isn't about just my son. This is about the systems that told you he was dangerous. That told you his skin, his clothes, his youth, made him less. That's the problem. And I promise it ends with me." With that, she took Malik's hand and walked back to the SUV, her heels striking the pavement with defiance. She didn't look back. But the people inside the bank would never forget the day Dr. Carter came through those doors. Dr. Nadine Carter took a slow, deliberate step forward, closing the space between herself and the white bank manager who had just called the police on her son. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It carried the weight of pain, fury, and the quiet dignity of someone who had endured a lifetime of being underestimated and had risen far above it. She looked the manager directly in the eyes. "You called the police on a child, trying to deposit money into his account?" The silence that followed was suffocating. You could feel it. No one in the bank moved. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. The manager, still standing behind the polished granite counter, looked completely thrown off. Her mouth opened, then closed. She glanced toward the officer standing by the door, then at Malik, who was standing close to his mother now, shoulders trembling, hands still holding the folded deposit note like it was armor. Finally, the manager found her voice, but it cracked slightly under the pressure. "He had someone else's card," she said, more defensive than apologetic. "I didn't know, I didn't think, you didn't ask," Dr. Carter said sharply, cutting through the excuse like a scalpel. The words hit hard. Direct. Unapologetic. You didn't ask for his name. You didn't ask why he was here. You didn't ask for context or ID or anything else that might have made this make sense to you. You assumed. The manager shrunk back slightly. Her arms crossed. Her chin tilted, searching for a way to regain control of the moment. But Nadine wasn't finished. She took another step forward, voice growing stronger, more resonant. You assumed, because he's black. Because he's young. Because he wasn't wearing a suit. Because he didn't match what you expected to see in this bank, in this neighborhood, standing at your counter with a debit card that didn't have his name on it. The murmurs began. Quiet whispers floated through the lobby like a shifting wind. A man in a business suit near the back slowly lowered his phone and just stared. A woman holding her toddler gasped softly. Two young bank employees at a side desk stood frozen, unable to look away. And then the phones came out. Quietly, discreetly, but unmistakably. People started recording. This wasn't just a banking issue anymore. It had become something else. A mirror. A message. A moment. Nadine noticed, but didn't care. She wasn't putting on a show. She was telling the truth. Let me ask you something, she continued, her voice a mix of fury and grief. Would you have called the police if it were a white boy doing the same thing? Dressed like my son? Same age, same behavior, same situation? The manager opened her mouth again, but nothing came out. Her face was pale now. She was exposed, and she knew it. Nadine didn't wait for an answer. You didn't think for a second that this young man, this child, could be responsible, smart, and trusted enough to handle a deposit on behalf of his mother. You didn't think a child like him could belong to someone like me. Malik looked up at his mother then, eyes wide, filled with something between pride and disbelief. She reached back, placing a protective arm around his shoulder. You judged him before he opened his mouth. You criminalized him before he took a single step. And in doing that, you didn't just insult him. You insulted me. You insulted every hard-working black parent trying to teach their child responsibility. And you insulted every child who now has to wonder if doing the right thing will still get them arrested. The silence had turned into stillness. No one was moving. Even the officers looked uncomfortable now, shifting from one foot to the other, eyes darting toward the door. Nadine's voice softened now, but the steel in her words remained. Do you know how dangerous your assumptions are? Do you know what it does to a young black boy's heart to be treated like a criminal before he's even a teenager? You stole something from him today. Something that money can't replace. Tears welled in Malik's eyes. The manager looked down now, her eyes glistening, but Nadine didn't care if they were tears of guilt or embarrassment. She had no interest in comfort. Not today. A slow ripple of murmured agreement passed through the lobby. Nadine took one final step forward and said clearly, this is not about a bank policy. This is about bias. This is about how systems are upheld by individuals too afraid to question their own prejudice. She paused, scanning the room, her eyes fierce. And if you think this is the last time you'll hear my name, you're mistaken. She turned to her son. Let's go. As they began walking toward the doors, someone in the bank began to clap. Then another. And another. It wasn't loud. It wasn't staged. But it was real. A moment of solidarity in a place where silence had ruled for far too long. Nadine and Malik walked out into the sunlight together. One hand held her purse. The other held his. He looked up at her as they reached the SUV and said softly, "Thank you, Mom." She looked down at him, eyes soft but unwavering. "No, baby. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth." And with that, the car door closed. But inside that bank, and across every screen where the footage would soon go viral, the conversation was just beginning. The room had gone silent, but not in the peaceful kind of way. This was the kind of silence that buzzed, heavy, charged, and pulsing with the tension of 1,000 unsaid truths. The bank manager stood frozen behind the counter, her face pale and jaw slightly slack. She had called the police on a young black boy for attempting to deposit $80 into a savings account. Now, she was face to face with that boy's mother. And what she didn't know not yet was who she had really crossed. Because Nadine Carter wasn't just any parent. She wasn't just another customer. She wasn't just another black woman demanding justice for her son. She was something much bigger. As Dr. Nadine Carter stood in the middle of that gleaming lobby, she didn't shout. She didn't flinch. She didn't even raise her voice. She didn't need to. Power doesn't scream. It commands. And Nadine Carter commanded. With slow, precise movements, she reached into her designer handbag and pulled out her phone, not in rage, but with the poise of a woman who had been in boardrooms tougher than this bank, who had faced scrutiny sharper than this stare, and who had survived every storm this world had tried to bury her in. She pressed a single contact and lifted the phone to her ear. Her eyes never left the manager. "Yes," she said, calm and clear. "This is Dr. Nadine Carter." I want all Carter Tech funds pulled from this institution. Effective immediately. You could hear a pin drop. The words didn't echo. They exploded silently into every corner of that room. The security guard at the front door shifted on his feet. One of the tellers took an audible breath. And the manager? Her face twisted as the truth caught up with her. Wait, you're Dr. Carter, she stammered. Her voice, which had moments ago been loud and commanding when speaking down to a child, was now small. Shaken. The blood had drained from her face. She knew the name. Everyone in the financial world did. Carter Tech was one of the fastest growing fintech firms in the country. Multi-billion-dollar valuation. Listed on Forbes Tech Titans list. It was revolutionizing the way modern banking was done. And Dr. Nadine Carter? She was the woman behind it all. A Harvard-educated former Wall Street strategist. The youngest black female executive in her firm's history before launching her own. A pioneer. And, today, the mother of the 13-year-old boy she had just humiliated. Nadine ended the call and slowly slipped the phone back into her bag. Then, she looked up, eyes locked onto the manager, and said with a voice as smooth as it was sharp, "Yes. I'm Dr. Nadine Carter. The mother of the child you accused. The child you criminalized. The child you called the police on." The manager's mouth opened, as if to speak, but Nadine continued unbothered. "And the black woman you never imagined could be your biggest client." A wave of realization washed over the entire bank. People who had been sitting quietly in the waiting area now looked fully engaged. Phones that were once hidden behind purses were now held in plain sight. One customer whispered to another, "She's the Dr. Carter?" The manager looked like she might crumble. But Nadine wasn't done. She walked slowly toward the front of the counter, deliberately, her heels clicking with each measured step. "Do you know how much business this bank has done with Carter Tech over the last 3 years?" she asked rhetorically. The manager didn't answer. She couldn't. Over $30 million in investments. Transactional systems. Payroll technology. Merchant accounts. My company trusted this bank. I trusted this bank. Her voice remained even. Measured. But you could hear the thunder rolling just beneath. And yet, today, that trust was destroyed, not by policy, but by prejudice. The manager finally spoke, voice trembling. I didn't know. I didn't realize." Nadine shook her head. "No. You didn't bother to realize. You saw a black boy with confidence and a debit card, and your first instinct wasn't to ask, it was to accuse." She turned slightly, addressing the entire lobby now. "This is why representation matters. This is why diversity matters. Because until people like you stop assuming that power and professionalism only come in one skin tone, boys like my son will always be treated as intruders even when they're doing everything right." Another silence swept across the room, this time not of tension, but reflection. The truth in her words struck people deeply. A man in a pinstripe suit near the ATM nodded. A young woman holding a latte wiped away a tear. The security guard lowered his head. "You judged him," Nadine said, turning back to the manager. "But in doing so, you judged me. You judged every parent who ever tried to teach their child financial literacy, responsibility, and independence only to have the world crush them the moment they stepped into it." The manager had no comeback. No defense. Only shame. And Nadine? She didn't offer forgiveness. She didn't offer comfort. She offered truth. And consequences. "I suggest your corporate office expects my legal team's call by morning," she said coolly. Then she turned to Malik, placed a hand on his back, and whispered, "Come on, baby. We're done here." Together, they walked out of that bank side by side. Nadine didn't slam the door behind her. She didn't have to. The silence she left in that room said everything. And by the time she pulled away in her SUV, half the bank already knew they hadn't just lost a client. They'd lost something bigger. Their reputation. But something in her paused. She could feel the eyes on her, not just from the officers or the manager, but from every corner of the bank. Customers frozen mid-transaction. Tellers who had stopped typing. Security, silent and stiff near the wall. And then there were the phones, still recording, still capturing, still unsure if what they were witnessing was a scene or a reckoning. Nadine turned back around, slowly. Her heels clicked softly on the marble as she stepped forward and faced the crowd head-on. Her son Malik stood beside her, clutching her hand, his face a mix of pride and lingering hurt. She looked at every face that dared to meet her eyes, and then she spoke calmly, clearly, without trembling. "This isn't just about my son," she said, her voice filling the space like a sermon. "This is about how quickly we judge others based on skin color, not character." The room remained silent. "This is about how a 13-year-old black boy, doing exactly what he was taught, being responsible, respectful, and financially smart, was treated like a criminal before he even opened his mouth." Some heads dropped. Others nodded slowly. "It's about how assumptions," she continued, "become dangerous when they're backed by power. When someone in a position of authority decides they don't need to ask questions because they think they already know the answer." Her eyes scanned the bank manager, the officers, and even the bystanders who had done nothing. That's how bias becomes policy. That's how trauma is created. That's how lives are damaged and trust is broken. She paused just long enough for the words to settle like stones. Then, with quiet grace, Nadine knelt down beside Malik. Her elegant suit folding perfectly as she brought herself to his level, eye to eye. She wrapped her arms around him, hugging him tightly. "You did nothing wrong," she whispered into his ear. "Nothing. You were brave. You stayed calm. You told the truth. And you stood your ground even when the world doubted you." Malik's eyes welled up again, but this time it wasn't from fear. It was from the overwhelming relief of being seen, defended, and believed. Nadine stood up again, tall and proud, and looked directly at the two officers who had arrived minutes ago, not knowing the storm they were walking into. "I hope next time," she said to them clearly, "you ask more questions before putting a child in handcuffs." The officers shifted awkwardly. One nodded slightly. The other lowered his gaze. There was no shouting. No swearing. No chaos. Just truth spoken without apology. And somehow, that cut deeper than any raised voice ever could. The bank manager still hadn't said a word. Her face was ashen, lips tight, staring down at the desk like it might swallow her whole. Customers looked around the lobby, some still filming, some wiping away quiet tears. One elderly woman with a walker simply whispered, "God bless that mother." And then, without another word, Nadine turned back toward the door. She took Malik's hand in hers, strong fingers wrapping gently around his smaller ones, and they walked together toward the exit. No noise. No noise but the sound of their shoes tapping against the polished floor. But behind them? A room full of silence. A room full of shame. And maybe, just maybe, a few people who had finally opened their eyes. As the doors slid open and the sunlight spilled in, Nadine glanced up toward the sky. For a split second, she exhaled the weight of the moment, the pain, the injustice, the fury she had held back for her son's sake. And Malik? He looked up at his mother like she was everything. Because in that moment, she was. She wasn't just a CEO. She wasn't just a strategic partner. She wasn't just the woman with the voice and the suit and the billion-dollar fintech company. She was the storm they never saw coming. The voice they had tried to silence. The protector of the boy they tried to break. And as they drove away, hand in hand, the story didn't end. Because behind them, the security footage was still rolling. The phones were still uploading. And somewhere across the internet, a video would soon go viral, a story would soon be told. A story not just about a boy in a bank, but about truth, bias, and the unstoppable force of a mother who refused to stay silent. Well, if this story moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us bring more real, powerful stories like this to life. Hit the bell icon so you never miss a moment that matters. Backhand index pointing right comment below. What would you have done in Dr. Carter's shoes?